very happy to be at the halfway point of Civil Rights Week. Before I introduce Rachel Graham, who's going to welcome us to the museum, I want to recognize two people in the audience that have made Civil Rights Week already, which is absolutely phenomenal. If you were at the breakfast, you heard the amazing music that was provided to us by Dr. Marco Marin. He's here. And if you heard him play, you enjoyed it as much as I did. He supported the accompanist, who was also phenomenal, but the accompanist could not have done what he did without Marco's magic fingers performing the way he performed. So thank you, Marco, very much. It's beautiful. I also just want to recognize just real briefly Dr. Andre Bunley. Dr. Bunley. Dr. Bunley is one of our Impact Award recipients. We recognized him as well as the co-chairs of what we call colloquially the Squeegee Collaborative. And we decided to recognize them because of the amazing work that they did. We're Baltimore, right? And we are family here, all of us. We're family. And we saw what happened just a year ago. It's a great tragedy. And rather than make a move to incarcerate all of the young people around corners washing windows, the mayor said, let's find a real solution. And he designated Dr. Bunley and then two persons to serve as co-chairs to find not a solution, but an answer to what it is that is causing our young men and young women to stand on the corners and do the work that they do. And he came up with just an amazing program that really got to the root cause of why there are kids, come on, and there are kids who are on the corners doing what they were doing. And it's just amazing. It has had an amazing impact on all of us as we go about the city. So just please join me in thanking again Dr. Arnold. I don't know if he slipped away already, but the chair of the Community Relations Commission is here. Is he? Okay, great. Reverend Dr. Andre Bunley, Esquire, who chairs. What did I say? All right, now you know I'm tired. Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary, Esquire, who is the chair of the Community Relations who has chaired our commission nobly. Tomorrow, he is convening a group of religious leaders in the rotunda of City Hall to talk about how they collectively can join in the efforts to make Baltimore more safe. It is his idea. It's something that he wants to do. For me, it really resonates with Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail, where he writes to all of the pastors in Memphis and says, look, you got to join me. You have to help me. You should not be on the sides deriding me. We need the religious leaders to help. And so Dr.
Yearing.
Dr. Yearing, Attorney Yearing, thank you for convening the group tomorrow. And please give it a round. Now, since the ad-libbing is going so beautifully, let me introduce Rachel Graham. She's the Director of External Affairs for the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland, African American History and Culture. She is a strategic communications and public relations professional. She has extensive experience in events marketing and management, hospitality, partnerships, and policy and community relations. Her experience has made very real the museum's intent to serve as Baltimore's community square. Prior to joining the museum, she served as communications director for the Family League of Baltimore. Her portfolio really and truly is amazing. She has advised and served in mayoral administrations in 4 different cities: Philadelphia, Houston, New Orleans, and of course, Baltimore. As I shared at the Baltimore's Civil Rights Breakfast on Monday, she's also a teacher, and with her trademark kindness, compassion, and caring, she has taught me what it means to be truly in partnership with not just this museum, but all who wish to support our office's vision and mission. And it's been an amazing journey of learning under Rachel's guidance. She's an avid traveler, as I shared earlier. I did a quick scan of her Facebook page. She's all over the place. She is a thinker, introspective, and kind. I also shared she's a great fan of the New Orleans Saints, and she added, I want to say the Philadelphia Eagles. Yes. All right, the Philadelphia Eagles. And of course, the Baltimore Ravens are on the list underneath this too. Please join me in welcoming Rachel.
I'm going to add again because she keeps forgetting. My top five, four of my top five are S. Carter, Hova, Jay-Z, and Jigga Man. So that's very important. That is very important to keep in mind. Thank you so much, Dana, for that amazing introduction. As she shared, I do serve as the Director of External Relations for the Reginald Phillips Museum. Our mission is to document, interpret, and preserve the complex experiences, contributions, and culture of Black people. Now, in that, our vision is that we be regarded as a trusted custodian, a respected authority, and a thought partner on the history, art, and culture of the African diaspora, with an emphasis on the state of Maryland. Now, the most important part of our mission and vision, I really like to emphasize particularly around why we partnered on this event. The Lewis Museum looks to serve as a catalyst of sustained change by providing robust programs, exhibitions, and bold conversations that educate and challenge. And that's what this week is all about, to educate and challenge us. If you have never been to the museum before, that's okay. Welcome. We invite you to come back. If you've been here before, welcome back. This conversation is very important. A lot of times people will come to this museum for our traveling exhibitions, of which there are several, and we're very proud of those. But the reason why we exist is because of our third floor permanent exhibition. One of my favorite places in the museum is if you go on the third floor through the glass doors, lines hold, things connect, Joy, she knows the name. You walk through there, you turn slightly to the left, and that's where you learn about the legacy of Black civil rights leadership in Baltimore, as well as the state of Maryland. And I'm kind of like getting chills because some of the folks that are featured in the exhibition, their legacies are sitting on this stage today. And so we're very excited to be a part of this conversation. I'm going to take one point of personal privilege because there's a woman that's in this room that called me very kindly a couple of days ago and said, hey, wait a minute. And her name is Miss Alice Braley Torriente. Please clap. Let me tell you why you're clapping. Her father was one of the founders of the Maryland Legislative Black Caucus. And so while she is not on the stage, I did want to pay respect to you. She's been Joy pulled my coattail. She has been a part of this museum for a very long time, in groups and all that. And so we just wanted to say thank you so much, Ms. Torriente, for joining us today. And with that, I will turn it back over to Dana and our very capable moderator. Thank you so much.
We're very happy to have Ms. Torriente husband's personal hero, and we have a photograph of, you gotta come to my house. We have a photograph of Walter P. Carter that sits on my fireplace mantle. So I see your dad every day. Every day. And I hear about him. And Jill was also the director of the Office of Equity and Civil Rights. I think 2 people, maybe 3, 4, 5 people before me. I lost track. And really boosted the office and increased its relevance during her tenure. Sandra Dobson. Sandra is, I think you might be my heart on this panel because for some reason we had the wrong picture for Sandra, we had the wrong this, that, and the other. She's like, Nancy, that's a lovely photo. Just so gracious and so kind. She has a long career.
Caught me on a good day.
Yeah, I did some background, although Sean will bring it out, but yeah, I think I got lucky because you could have really given it to me. She is the daughter of Wendell Dobson. Wendell Phillips Jr., to Sandra's left, is the son of Reverend Wendell Phillips Sr. I want to give him a warm welcome. He is here from North Carolina. Thank you. When we started talking about this, Wendell, I will tell you that people said, well, you can call Wendell, but he ain't coming because we tried to get Wendell. Wendell doesn't answer the phone. Wendell's not here. I said, well, try Wendell. And you're here, so thank you so much for being here. Mitchell Sennaar is seated next to Wendell, and I think Lisa was the first one I called. Actually, first I called Jill, and then Jill said, "You gotta call Lisa." So I called Lisa and said, "What do you think about this idea?" She's like, "This is a great idea," and she said that she would absolutely be here. Lisa is one of the key holders of her family's legacy. She is the granddaughter of Lily Mae Carroll Jackson. Great-granddaughter of Lily Mae Carroll Jackson. Yes, applaud. Phenomenal. Granddaughter of Juanita Jackson Mitchell, who was for all you lawyers in here, she was the first Black woman admitted to the Maryland bar.
And the first graduate
and the daughter of Clarence Mitchell III. And to her left is Senator Michael Bowen Mitchell, who, go ahead, yes. Just a dear, an absolute dear. His work, his reputation, the way he has navigated in Baltimore is just so well known, and he has been just so personally kind to me and to my family, and so I know you have a lot to share, so I don't need to go deep into your introduction, but I do want to take the moment to personally thank you for all that you have done to hold the legacy tight. Thank you. Our moderator tonight is a friend. He's one of the people who gets to see me on Sunday mornings huffing and puffing and trying to climb the hills in Druidville Park, which he typically is way ahead. Moderator, the phenomenal Sean Yoes. He has worked in television, film, and newspapers during a career in media, which has spanned more than 30 years. He recently was one of the co-producers of a film that has gotten much acclaim. He might give us a little shout about it. He got won an award, Best Environmental Film. We were talking about something else, something completely not related to this week. And I said, well, I'll get back to you after Civil Rights Week, and you might be interested in coming to some of this. We're going to have a panel with Baltimore's children and grandchildren of civil rights leaders. He goes, hold on, what? He says, tell me more. He goes, wow, that's amazing. I would love to moderate it. And I it's done. So thank you, Sean, for saying yes and being willing to take this on. Please welcome Sean Yoes.
Good evening. I'm gonna be honest. I've done a bunch of these events before. I've been on the radio and everything else for many years, and I never get nervous. But I'm a little bit nervous this evening because everybody on this stage, I have some deep connections with everyone, and so this is I know this is a conversation for you all, but it's also a really full circle, surreal moment for me because over the 30 years that I've been in journalism in Baltimore, I've reported on all of these people's descendants and them personally. Joe Carter, I don't want to make this about me, but Joe Carter got me my job at the Afro. So this is deep. I'm just honored to be here. I'm honored to be the moderator of this conversation. And I'm honored to be at the Lewis Museum. This is not just one of my favorite places in Baltimore, it's one of my favorite places in the world, honestly. And I have some family here, my little sister, and my dear friend, Rachel Graham. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy that you all are here to join us. So I don't want to waste too much time, but I want to give a brief kind of historical context to what our ancestors, what they encountered once they got here to Baltimore. Old West Baltimore was one of the vanguard Black communities of the United States. And far too few people know that history. I'm not going to go into great detail because we'd be here all night, but for 100 years, this city, from the time, the decade just prior to the Civil War, when we had the largest free Black population in the United States, to the time that the Goon Squad was in their heyday, for about more than a century, this was a place of great significance. And as a matter of fact, Joe Carter shared something with me today. It was a video of Vernon Dobson. And one of the lines one of the things that stuck with me that he said, all of this stuff started in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. So I just want people to understand that when the ancestors of these people on the stage, their descendants, their grandparents and parents came on the scene, they inherited a great community and they built upon that great community. Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, with that brief historical context in mind, let's just get started. Joe, I want to start with you. Senator Carter, I want to start with you. You were a journalist before you got into politics. As I noted, I took your own job at the Afro at your invitation and your direction to go down and talk to Bob Matthews and get my job. What do you think your dad would have thought of you working as a journalist?
Well, thank you, Sean, and I want to say thanks to everybody that's here that's listening that cares enough about our history to be here tonight. I don't know what he would have thought, but I think that, one, I worked for the Afro, the oldest and most insignificant Black newspaper, and I can only say, because I'm going to be really brief, because I know there's a lot of questions and a lot of stuff more to go. First of all, I wanted to go to law school. That's why I was leaving the Afro, but I was very happy and proud to be a journalist at the Afro-American. And it was in my father's time and in many of our time, the only news source that would report on the Black community and what they were doing. So I was happy to be there, like steeped rich in that history. And briefly, from the time my dad died when I was a little girl, I was always searching for what I could do in his legacy and to have value, because I knew that it was a blessing for me to have been born to him and my mother. And I knew that I had an obligation to do something significant with my life based on the fact that I was blessed to be born tonight. So I think that working at the Afro was a big start, a great start.
Marnie McKoy and Sandra Dobson. Vernon Dobson, I think I told you, Sandra, backstage that well, as soon as I met you, he told me, he said, Sean, he said, get as much of God as you can stand. And that moment, that statement sticks with me to this day, and I'm trying to get as much of Jesus as I can stand. But I make the point because he was just a beautiful man, a lovely man. And you said you shared something with me. You said he belonged to everybody, which sometimes it's some consternation with you, you know. And his brother, Harold Dobson, was my pastor and baptized me. So I'm asking both of you, what was it like, the legacy of those two men who were kind of the founding members of the Goon Squad, the infamous and famous and powerful Goon Squad? Can you kind of just reflect on that a little bit, just how it came together and how the idea came forward?
I don't want to misspeak because one of the last two members of the Goon Squad is sitting right here. That's Mr. Pat Scott.
There it is. Mr. Scott.
And they came together because they were of like mind. They were different people, but they were of like mind. And they had the same, I don't talk as loud as my father. You can hear me there. They were of like mind. They saw a need and they tried to fill it. They each came from a different place. And if I may, I'm borrowing this from Pat because he has a little video that he recently did. And it talks about the Goons and who they were. So, there were Dr. Augustus Adair, who was a major fundraiser. There was Dr. Marion Bascom, who was the community coordinator. There was Reverend Harold Dobson, the enforcer. Reverend Vernon Dobson, they called him Father. Everybody called him Father. He was the servant leader. Dr. Homer Faber did strategic planning. Lalit Gadia Esquire was the statistician. Judge Joseph Howard was the legal activist. Congressman Perrin Mitchell was economic development. Reverend Wendell Phillips was outreach. Mr. Pat Scott, campaign manager and graphic designer. Reverend Frank Williams, he was the force behind the scene. And guess what? There was always a question. There were no women. Where were the female goons? There was an adjunct female Goon Squad member, Madeline Murphy. So, what was it like growing up under that umbrella? It was daunting. It was scary. It was a lot to live up to, but it was so much fun. It was a lot of fun. The only thing that, as I told you before, it really bothered me was my father was father to everybody. Everybody called him Dad. That's my father. That's my father. He's not your father. He's mine. He's mine. But as I got older, I understood the need for him to be there, out in the community, doing what he did. And it didn't lessen what he gave us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Marn, who is the firstborn grandchild.
Also, just wanted to mention, with this event is being live streamed.
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to let people know that.
Thank you.
Am I on?
Yeah.
I was never on,
We're
did
never
I
on.
say that?
Well, yes, we heard you.
Oh, I'm Vernon Dobson's daughter.
I want to add my thanks to Dana and to all who are hosting. And I have to say, we were sitting in the back, just chatting and catching up. Some of us, I was meeting some folks for the first time, and Wendell I haven't seen, well, except for Sunday. So we're just catching up. And I looked around the table and I said, this is the panel right here. Go get everybody and tell them to come back here and hear this conversation, because the conversation was so rich. I have to be honest with you. When I was younger, I don't think I understood the full extent of everything that was happening around me. It probably wasn't until I got a little older and started to understand the weight of social justice. And you know, you have like a flashback in your mind, like, oh, that's what's going on. And so the principles of that are really what I pulled away. So the first is, you can't lead where you're not willing to serve. And I saw our grandfather, I saw Uncle Harold live that. So I can't really tell you many messages that either one of them preached from the pulpit, but I can tell you that they were living epistles read and seen of men. They lived the word, they lived that out. And then he also provided a model for us of what church is in terms of serving, in terms of being the epicenter for the community where everybody can gather and strategize and bring your skills, your talent, your knowledge, your network to bear in order to address some of the greatest questions of his day and our day. So it's that model that I learned from him.
Well, Sean, you asked the question, I never answered it. One thing I learned from them that we've kind of taken all the way through, there is always room at the table. And that's a sign that's in our kitchen. So whether it's the kitchen table or whatever table, there's always room.
So I want to mention quickly that Union Baptist, Brandon Dobson's church, was the church that was founded by Harry Johnson.
Harvey
Johnson, who was the founder of the
NAACP.
well, the Liberty.
Niagara Movement.
Oh, right, the precursor to the Niagara Movement, but the Brotherhood of Liberty, which was a platform for the top lawyers, black lawyers in the United States, and that title was given to them by none other than Charles Hammond Houston. So that's just another contextual piece of this conversation that we're having. Wendell, I want you to retell the story. We talked about it a little bit on the Zoom meeting we had, of how your dad wound up coming to Baltimore and wound up staying in Baltimore.
Again, let me add my name of thanks to Dana and all who were behind this to put this together. Yeah, Dad was on his way to med school. That's what he thought he was going to do. And he started that way and went to Virginia Union and ended up with the likes, meeting the likes of the president then, Reverend Dr. Samuel DeWitt Proctor, who turned him around. And they had a close relationship. He would babysit his kids sometime. He would let him use his car, but he said, Lord, Wendell, please don't park in a liquor store or anything like that, whatever you do. But he had been in, he went to Divinity School in Rochester. It was Colgate, Rochester then, and that's where he met Mom. And he was the head of the NAACP in Rochester in '63, and he and Malcolm X was there at that time, and they were talking with the mayor about how, what's going to happen with the city, and they both told him, this city is going to explode if you all don't do something about this pressure and this racism. And so, he took an earful at the time we were talking about it the other day, Senator Mitchell, that Daisy Bates had given Dad an earful because at that time they didn't want to mix with Malcolm X at that point. Now, she was obviously a leader for the Little Rock Nine with the NAACP, but later on she was on the board of the NAACP. So she gave Dad a what for, and you know, and all that kind of thing. But anyway, after he finished, Dad was called to Heritage, and he turned it down. Well, it wasn't Heritage at the time. It was Northwest Congregational Church, and he turned it down the first time. And then they got his brother on, Shannon Phillips, to come down and say, "Come on, man, let's do this." So the second time he came, and he told Mom, who didn't want to leave Rochester, he said, "Don't worry, D, we're going to be there a couple of years, and we're out." And there he was and until he passed, which this year is 30 years ago. And just did, you know, caught up with the rest of the goons, and you know, and dragged me everywhere with him. From the time he told my mother, once he gets out of diapers, and can tell me he's got to go to the bathroom, he's mine. I got it. And that's how it all went. You just kind of sit at the foot of all these people, and you get all this knowledge. Sometimes you don't even know you get it. And then when you get older, you open your mouth and they jump out.
Right.
And you're like, oh, I did hear that. But that's how Dad got to Baltimore. That was one of the main things about the Goon Squad, was that it was a unique, kind of like one of those cosmic moments, you know, where the perfect storm, where you had all these disparate folks come together from different places. Judge Howard was from Iowa. You know, Pat Scott had originally been from Arkansas. Dad was from Pittsburgh. Homer Faber was from Pittsburgh. Lali from India. So you had all these folks come together at one time with one mind. And that was to do God's will, and doing God's will is doing the work of the people.
And raise hell.
And that's right.
Lisa, I want to ask you about, we talked about this a little bit also in the Zoom meeting, about the proximity of all these families, the neighborhood. Your family, homesteaders in Drew Hill Avenue, close by were Thurgood Marshall, born on Dolphin Street, right around the corner. And I know the Murphys, I believe, had a home in that area as well. When you think about that history of Old West Baltimore, because I know you, like me, a historian essentially, and you think about fast forward to today, what runs through your mind when you think about how the close proximity, like literally within blocks of each other, these titans, and some of them, again, represented descendants of yours. What do you think?
I think that that's what our community is supposed to be. And as Black Americans, we've lost that because we've been constantly pulled apart, constantly disrupted. And to hear and to grow up knowing that Thurgood Marshall's mom was my grandfather, Clarence Mitchell's elementary school teacher, and Dr. Carl Murphy and Lily Carroll Jackson, my great-grandmother, and the editor of the Afro were schoolmates, right? And so, of course, they're going to work together. And so that is what community does. That Thurgood Marshall was in school with my grandfather, but they didn't get to be friends until high school because they were 3 years apart. But my grandmother Juanita was in school with them. She skipped 2 grades, so they were all together. And then Grandpa goes to Lincoln, and Thurgood's there. And so it is only natural when Grandma Juanita goes to become the youngest member of the National NAACP staff at the age of, what is she, 21? I'm telling your mom's story, Grandma. And who's in the office next to her but Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston. And so they all were community. And so you work with people who you have things in common with. I mean, that's even in business. You know, we work with people who we like and who we get to know. And so Jill's dad and my dad, I mean, I've known Senator Jill Carter my whole life since I've known me. First pajama party I went to, only one probably was at her house. But our dads, were together. Dad was a bit younger. Clarence Mitchell III is my dad, who won elective office when he was 22. My mom, 21, thank you. My mother, Clarice Mitchell Wheatley, is here in the audience. I have to say hello, Mom. Who was there and a part of the community also, because you're talking about when I was a kid, when I was born, the family office on Druid Hill Avenue, 1239 Druid Hill Avenue, was the which is going to be the Juanita Jackson Mitchell Law Center, was Grandma's law office. Across the street, you had the Baltimore branch of the NAACP, which great-grandma and her team were running, and my mom, and we lived a little further down the street, 1230 Druid Hill. And so Dad was there, who was a young, gonna become a legislator. And so all of this is happening within steps of each other. And so it's community.
Michael Mitchell, you shared a newspaper clipping backstage, which talked about how Black politicians were being surveilled by the police. Now, you weren't an official member of the Goon Squad because you were younger. However, you and your colleagues, your contemporaries, endured a lot of the harassment and scrutiny that some of your elders endured. Speak to that as, during your time in politics and just being a community leader.
Number one, I want to say good evening to all of you, and thank you for coming. And I just wanted a brief note that Dana Moore, I will be ever indebted to you because you came to the city, but your father preceded you. Her father was the first Black general, General Peterson of the United States Marine Corps for the entire world. And more importantly, he worked with Congressman Perrin Mitchell to give a new emphasis to the Marine Corps. So suddenly Black Marines started getting promoted all around the world and gave them a new name. And we've got to remember those people who, from a national perspective, he changed the around the world the perception of how the military was. Before there were only the Marines were known as white guys coming in from the south to come in and play the beaches. And General Peterson came in, there was a pilot on top of that, and came in and made sure that Blacks were promoted and were up front and were part of the community and involved in things. And they would regularly work together to make sure Blacks who were mistreated in the service, especially in the South, got a decent hearing. And more importantly, there was one incident of a young man who is now a major businessman, but he was accused of kind of reckless eyeballing of a white woman on the face. And that's the old Southern thing, you're not supposed to look at white women. And he was given 5 years in the brig. And by the time General Peterson got punishment, they sent him home to spend the rest of his tour with his parents in Edmondson Village. But that's one story, how they worked together. But in terms of the story, because I'm the archivist of the Mitchell family, and I just want you to know that there was a police commissioner here in Baltimore City. His name was Donald Pomeroy. And you've got to watch out. He was head of the National Association of Police Officers. And everybody thought he was coming in to clean up the corrupt police officers. But he was worse than the people. It was like he putting the fox in the hen house. I can remember as a young member of the city council that suddenly when I would be parked in a particular location for members of the city council. And then suddenly I would have a ticket on my car. And then I would also find out that various mail that had come to my mailbox where I was living on Lafayette Avenue had been pulled out. And then my neighbors told me that there were some strange men going through my trash cans. And it was not just me, but members of the city council and members of the state legislature. It happened to my brother. And I believe it was her brother one time that called and said that, or in the family discussion, C4 said, you know, there's a white man picking up our trash today. And that was unusual. But it was a Baltimore City police officer. And it was a special unit that he had Pablo established to surveil blacks in the community who were criticizing police brutality. And do you know that when his confirmation hearing came up, I was the only member of the council, and to give credit to Senator Bertie Welcome, and of course my uncle Congressman Clarence Mitchell came to testify. But Pomelo had every seat in the city council chamber filled with police officers, almost an intimidating force. And then when the police commissioners got up to speak, he always said, I know what you do, I know where you go, and I know who you see. And of course, the only thing I can think of at the time, I said, Mr. Commissioner, I know where you go, and I know who you see. And then he started looking at all the black police officers, Bishop Robinson and Colonel Harrison. They wanted to know if they talked to me. But you've got to know that this was a mean city. Imagine the police going through your mail, going to my children's school to try to find out what's going on. And so that was the force we were dealing with. And that's why my late father, Clarence Mitchell Jr., when he went to Schaefer, we were always fighting him. But the one thing that Clarence Mitchell, when he got to deal with you, you generally agreed with him at the end of the discussion. And he got Schaefer to appoint Bishop Robinson as our first black police commissioner in the Baltimore City's history. And now the police building bears his name. There should be one other note too. Just down from there was a place that was owned by Jack Pollock, who was a corrupt politician and deal maker.
Black Jack Pollock, right?
Yeah. No, he was a white man.
No, I know that.
Yeah, they called him like that. But he controlled things, and we were able to beat the Pollock machine and using foot leather and fried chicken to get voters out. But it's that other building that Jack Pollock owned. It is now called the Harry Cummings building, and it granted, of course, from City Hall. And you should know that Harry Cummings was the first black lawyer to practice in the state of Maryland. He came from Washington, D.C. at the behest of the Brotherhood of Liberty. And so I always make sure people say, well, the police could have done that. But I have the Baltimore Sun article from December the 29th, 1974, where it says, police filed data on black politicians. Every black who was in office and who criticized the police and police brutality had a file and were surveilled with pictures taken of them, and it compromised a lot of black officials, and so they couldn't speak out. And of course, my brother Clarence and I always said we had an open mic, and that we just spelled my name correctly, that's all, when they talked about it. And so when they tried to come to me, and it was really interesting. One time I went down in my car, and I parked in a building on St. Paul Street, and all of a sudden, I went out, and of course, I never did because my parents smoked marijuana or anything else. And there was a marijuana cigarette in the floor of my car. Wow. Just there. And then across the street was a police car. So I immediately, just sat there, and then I got, of all persons, Billy Murphy was in the same building, and he came down as my witness. So the police drove off. I bet they did. And but that's what Pamela did. Put this marijuana cigarette in the floor of my car. There's one person I wanted to recognize, and I'll be 30 seconds, and that's Dr. Yeager. Raise your hand so everybody can see you, because the last time I saw him, we were making mischief with Jesse Jackson in Chicago. And he has committed himself to making sure that this, from a national perspective, that Operation Push is still willing to fight. You know, I grew up, what I learned from my parents was, and the first song I sang was, oh freedom, oh freedom, oh freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. And that's what we've got to inspire people to do now. Get these children, make sure the school teachers and others take time. These children are deprived of love and attention, and we're worrying about the criminal activity of juveniles. Take time to talk to them. It's most important. Children are the most important investment. Clarence Mitchell Jr. and Perrin Mitchell were born in Stockton Alley with no running water, no indoor facilities. And yet when they moved to Bloom Street, the neighbors immediately said, in Bloom in Pennsylvania, said, here come those Mitchell boys, straight from the alley. Don't associate with them. Never give up on a child, no matter their circumstances. They may be able to do great and wonderful things with their lives.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alice Braley Toriente. Pardon my back. I feel a kinship to all of you. I am 85 years old, and I have known all of your family members. When I was a little girl at the historic Leadenhall Baptist Church, Mrs. Jackson stood in the pulpit of our church and talked to us about liberation. My mother, Jessie Braley, was the person who collected the money, the $500, every year to give to the NAACP. As children growing up, we had wallets with dust in them, but we had an NAACP youth card in our wallets. Napoleon Dobson and I were at Coppin together. Jill, of course, I know you from being around in politics and what have you. It's good to be back in this house this evening. I was here on the windy day when they broke ground to build this building. It was a very cold and windy day. Mrs. Fugit was here, and Miss Fugit had a little bit of civil rights in her background. People may not realize this, but her son, along with a girlfriend of mine, had gone to Catholic school. At the time that they graduated from the 8th grade, there were no black high schools that boys could attend. Not one black boy could go to a high school here in Baltimore City. And so Mrs. Fugit was on a committee that worked to get boys into some of the high schools here in Baltimore. In fact, because they fought so hard, some of the boys went and did not have to pay any tuition for the 4 years that they went. But enough of that. I want to talk to you about some civil rights here. My father started off as a poor guy who hitchhiked his way from South Carolina. He got here and did a number of odd jobs, but he was fortunate enough to get a job as a Pullman porter. During the time that he was a Pullman porter, he was fortunate enough to be taken under the wing of A. Philip Randolph. As many of you know, A. Philip Randolph was one of the architects of the March on Washington. He and Bayard Rustin and B.F. McLaurin were guests at our home on Baker Street on a number of occasions. During the time that they were planning the March on Washington, when the March on Washington took place, Baltimore was second to New York for having the highest number of buses going to the March on Washington.
And New York was almost
As a
10 times
result
big.
of that, A. Philip Randolph said to my father, "You ought to run for office." My father had no idea because he was a Pullman porter at that time. Well, Mr. Randolph told him that if you decide to run, I will come to Baltimore and do a fundraiser for you. He was a man of his word, Mr. Randolph came and did the fundraiser, my father ran, and was able to be elected to the House of Delegates for the 40th District. Verna Welcome was the senator. They met on top of the old Met, where the old Met theater was on North Avenue. That was where the 40th District met. But people don't realize that in West Baltimore, as we talked about, how Baltimore was the crux of everything. West Baltimore was run by Jack Pollock. Jack Pollock was the person who controlled who could run as a Democrat, be they black or white. That Jack Pollock did not allow any blacks to run in West Baltimore. So Harry Cole was running at the time. And Harry Cole had to run as a Republican. People don't realize the history that Thomas Dulles Andro had was the folks here in Baltimore. Nancy Pelosi's father. Nancy Pelosi's father wanted to run as mayor. So he and Willie Adams, another great entrepreneur in the city of Baltimore, worked with his wife, Victorine Adams, who was the founder of Woman Power, and what was the other name? Woman Power, and there was another group, Colored Women's Democratic Club.
Valiant women.
Right. They got together and got black folks on cheese buses and took them down to the Board of Elections, which was not a pleasant place to be at that time. But we got black folks registered. So after we got them registered, people were instructed to vote for Dulles Andro, Nancy Pelosi's father, on the Democratic ticket, and they learned how to split their ticket to vote for Harry Cole on the Republican line, and they both got elected. There are a number of outstanding stories here in Baltimore through Miss Adams, Miss Victorine Adams, his wife, and all the things that she did, the things that A. Philip Randolph did. Bayard, there's a movie that's being made about Bayard Rustin, who was the major architect of the March on Washington. Barack Obama and his wife have a production company, and they are the ones who are producing this movie that's coming out very shortly this month about A. Philip Randolph. But my dad was very active in getting civil rights legislation passed, working with people who were in the state of Maryland who needed representation. We got the bill passed so that they did senior citizens only paid half fare on the buses. He dressed in old clothes because he got concerns about people who were being mistreated in the welfare offices, etc. He went around and saw that our people who had gotten these promotions were doing that, so we reported that back. I'll end now, but there's a lot more that we can talk about.
Joe Carter, I want to ask you about, because we talked about this with Michael Mitchell a little bit, but you told me earlier that your dad was deeply hated by William Donald Schaefer. And you, generations afterwards, had your own run-ins with the Democratic Party. Why don't you speak to the parallels, if you will, of how politics tends to be oppressive when it comes to black liberation, because you and your dad, you are your father's daughter, I'll say it that way.
Thank you, Sean. So, Alice Torianti reminds me that we could, each person here and probably in the audience too, could really have their entire own segment because there's so much history here. So, my dad was not necessarily the organizational person. He was the activist who was very outside of the political arena. I remember my mother telling me that he didn't want to be in politics because he never wanted to be forced to compromise his principles. I did not understand that, Sean, and everyone. I did for the life of me. what do you mean? Like, why would you have to do that? Wow. Hello. But one of the mainstays for me and one of the reasons that I'm able to do what I do is because at the core of my being, it is my understanding and knowledge that you never compromise your principles, no matter what. No matter who it is, no matter what, self gain you could have, no matter how many people are against you, at the end of the day, you're put on the earth to further your own cause, your own mission, and your principles. And so that being said, so believe it or not, when I was little, and my dad died early because I was around the village of my people, and all the people in the struggle were in my living room and in my community, I thought my dad was just deeply loved. Everybody loved my dad. In fact, as I went through school and some people didn't like me, I'm like, I wish I could be more like my father, where everybody just liked me. Little did I know as I grew up, there was a visceral hatred by many people of my father for the reason that he was uncompromising. You couldn't buy him off. He wasn't going to relent from what he believed was right. And at that time, it was fights like when he left CORE because it wasn't moving fast enough and became the head of Activist Inc. And the major fight then was against Morris Goldsecker and the slum housing and the predatory lending. He wouldn't relent. And so I didn't know that that was necessarily what I was destined to do. But as fate would have it, I got elected. In 2003 was my first year. It's been actually 20 years since my first election. And I just thought, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is where, like, I was a lawyer and one client at a time. By the way, y'all, I used to see Reverend Dobson in court all the time when I was with a lawyer in a criminal. And I mean, Reverend Dobson, what you doing here? I just came to speak up for this young fellow. All the time. And so I just thought, okay, well, I'm going to further the cause. I'm going to fight for what I believe is right. I did not expect the same visceral hatred. And for the record, when I first got elected, not to talk about me, but there are parallels with Schaefer and his visceral hatred of my father, Michael. I'm sure you remember Senator Mitchell when he was nominated for the Community Action Agency, and then some, backstabbing stuff happened and he didn't get it. And William Donald Schaefer saying Walter Carter is too radical for Baltimore. But it wasn't just that. It wasn't like we were allowed to have like a difference of opinion and then just go around away and respect each other. It was like, we want you dead. We want to destroy you. So I didn't expect it later on when I first got elected. Martin O'Malley, our Pomelo time was locking up everybody in Baltimore, the illegal arrest, 750,000 people, whatever you think of him, 750,000 arrests from 1999 to 2006. And so I didn't expect to take on the fight of O'Malley stop the illegal arrest, but I did. And honestly, because of how I grew up, I thought everybody was going to say, oh yeah, that's wrong, let's just fix this. I didn't know it was going to become really, when I think about it now, I didn't know it was going to become a defining moment of my political career. I didn't know I was going to go from rising star to pariah. But at the end of the day, you know what? It's not compromising my principles, and it's who I'm supposed to be and destined to do so. That's
Delegate Joe Carter just said it, Joe Carter said it. For the Dobsons, can you tell us something about Vernon Dobson that people don't know? Would that may surprise people?
He didn't want to be a preacher.
Yeah, that is surprising.
He wanted to be an architect when built buildings. My mother did not expect to marry a minister. They met in Texas when he was in the Navy. He was stationed in Texas, and they had planned this life with a young couple, and they would live
Just
a
wanted to have a
normal
good
life.
time.
Yeah, but his mother, my grandmother, who was the first fighter in the on that side of the family, she loved hats. She'd go to Hoshelcombe to get a hat, and back then she couldn't put it on her head. She had to hold it over her head to see how it looked. And one day she went down. She's my word, to hell with that. She pulled the hat down on her head and said, from now on. So she got to my father and said, you have to be a minister. Your father's a minister. Your grandfather was a minister. Your uncle's a minister. You must be a minister. And because Daddy was so giving and wanting to please his mama, he came back and went to Howard School of Divinity and gave those dreams of building buildings away, even though he still built the Head Start Center at Union Baptist Church, which Marnie is a product of, and which has graduated how many? 11,000 children. Many of them of whom are now doctors and lawyers. So that's something I don't think most people would know about Dad.
It's fascinating. But Martin?
Mine is much lighter than that.
Okay.
He loved candy.
Oh.
He loved candy and he hid it from us. And so as the grandkids, we would almost like nominate each other to try to go find the candy. So one was like the lookout, you know, like, he's in his study, go now, go now, go now. And the other had to go in there and find the candy and then, hurry up, he's coming, don't look there, he hid it there the last time, he's not gonna hide it there again. So he loved candy, but when I tell you, Sean, when we heard those footsteps coming back to that room, it was like, run for your life, he's coming, abort. So he loved candy so much that, as many of you know, Sunday we celebrated the anniversary of what would have been his 100th birthday. And so Sunday we celebrated at the historic Union Baptist Church. And he loved candy so much that our giveaway was candy that day. So he loved candy and we risked our lives to find it when he did it from us.
Wendell, I'm curious to know what your dad thought when you decided to get into politics.
Well, he told me, sure enough, stay away from the church. But Dad had already passed when I got into politics. Yeah, that's all right. So, because, you know, I wasn't thinking about it. He died in 93, and I ran in, what was it, 99? 99, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did a whole bunch of things at one time. I bought a house, got married, and ran.
Yeah,
And came in, got married the day after Christmas, and then went on a honeymoon, came back and said, all right, bye. I'm going on Apples for 3 months. But yeah, so he, you know, but Dad died at 58. And so a lot of times, I mean, especially when you have your father's name, you had half the friends and twice the enemies. And people want to see you finish out their life sometimes because that's comfortable for them. And you're sitting in the middle of all this, you know, trying to figure your way out in the world. And so, you know, you've got this good foundation. You're like, well, we can build upon that. You know, we can build upon the foundation and do, you know, do more with it. But after a while, you start to realize, you know, you kind of come into your own and you start to figure out, you know what, I'm supposed to do something else. There's something else I'm supposed to do. And to Jill's point, you talk about, after my first session, I went back and I found one of Dad's journals. And I looked at it and he wrote and felt exactly the same way I did. He said, a principled man can't do anything, can't get anything done in that. Because the rails are already greased. You come in, you're running somebody else's agenda. And the interesting part is, especially in our urban centers, in the cities, we fight for quality of life stuff. It's not just another point on your taxes or something like that in Montgomery County. We are fighting, we're wanting things for people's lives. And you end up fighting this system. And the irony is, you're trying to get into the system. So that you're trying to do it from the belly of the beast. And you realize, oh, okay, I'm part of this. And then you realize the only way you can do things, that you need 71 votes. You can have all the great ideas in the world, but if you can't get 70 other people to join with you, it's not going to happen. So you have to figure a way to maneuver that. And then that's where you talk about, then you have to be in a leadership role, at some point. And how much of your soul you got to give up to do that. And so it's difficult. And it's not for everybody, but there are some folks who are cut out for it and do a great job at it. Jill, in particular, she's ready to battle those folks all the time. And so that's good. So I think part of what I do is, I go out and I write, and just become kind of a witness to everything that's going on. Kind of like what James Baldwin said, his job is to be, it is to be a witness to the movement and what goes on, and put the pen to paper and keep track of it, which is what I've got to do. Sitting around when you learn all of the people that you've been around. You talk about people in your house all the time. There used to be a time where folks would come visit and they'd stay at your house.
Yeah.
Nobody was going to hotels, and they would stay at your house, and you better not try to stay somewhere else. And the conversations that they would have in those houses, you never know who's in your house. I said, Jim Bevel was in the house one time. Jesse Jackson would come around, because the three churches, Union, Heritage, and Douglas Memorial, was the triumvirate. That's where everyone came. When something was going on civil rights wise, they were going to one of those three churches. All of those three churches. And it's quite a blessing. I was richly blessed to grow up around the folks that I did. There are a whole lot of stories, I can't tell you all of them, but because those folks were just as funny as they were ready to fight. But you had to be. You kind of had to laugh that off, because what they were dealing with day in and day out was just so crazy that they had to take that time, and a lot of them would do. A lot of times it was fishing trips, and I was, I was only one kid. I was the only one who was the only child, so it just dragged me along everywhere to go. And as I said, that was most people didn't want to be hanging with their parents. I loved it. I loved running around with Dad and getting in elections and running in, especially with folks called the goons, which really was a pejorative term foisted on them by some reporter who said Aaron Mitchell's goon squad, and they laughed at it and it stuck. And but it was a great time, and we certainly want to continue in whatever way we find, whether it's on the radio, whether it's in political office, whether it's writing, whether it's Senator Mitchell's got history not only of he got history of all of Baltimore, that we need to get that on tape and run that.
Lisa, as founder of the Lily McCarroll Jackson Charter School and Museum, obviously education is something that has been.
So I'll say I'm not a founder. A supporter. My great grandmother, my Uncle Senator Mitchell's grandmother, Lily Carroll Jackson, willed her home on Utah Place, said, when I die, I want that to become a civil rights museum. Tell them what we did. Tell them how we fought for first class citizenship. And so she kept a repository of letters, of documents, of all kinds of things. It's a roadmap to freedom, really. in terms of, and you gotta keep it going. And she said, my children and my grandchildren, as Mike told me, are my investment on eternity. And she expected us and her daughter and others to carry it out. And so her home became, this is the founder of the Lily Carroll Jackson Museum, it's kind of my and my grandmother's sister, Virginia, founded the museum in great grandma passed in 74, they founded the museum in 1978, and it ran until 1990s, early 90s. And then we went into partnership with Morgan State University. They got the building, we had the contents, it underwent a tremendous restoration. And I was a part of that effort. I volunteered as a family member on the committee with Morgan, because who's gonna know your family history better than Uncle Mike and me? And so we wanted to make sure to get it right when it was going up on the walls of the museum. So it underwent, the committee met for almost 6 years, 2010 to about 2016, and the museum reopened in 2016. Lily Carroll Jackson Museum, it was the Lily Carroll Jackson Museum, and it became the Lily Carroll Jackson Civil Rights Museum. And that's so important, that names matter, and there's a website, and you can go visit 3 days a week. Please go to learn more, because it's there. The Lily Mae Carroll Jackson Charter School started because Roland Park reached out to Uncle Mike, again, the head of our family, the elder in our family, and said, "Well, we have permission to name the school after your great-grandmother." Well, if you're gonna do something that industrious, yeah, she was for education. Great-grandma said when her daughter, my grandmother at 14, was heading to University of Pennsylvania, she was 15-ish. University of Pennsylvania, she finished high school early, she graduated, skipped a few grades, going to University of Pennsylvania, and got a meeting with the dean there. And the dean said, "Well, can your daughter make it here? She's 15, she's ready for college." She said, "You can teach a flea. In a flea service, a child can be taught how to learn." And so when you talk about never leaving a child out, great-grandma would be proud that this charter school exists, because some of the public schools, quite frankly, are failing. They're running with rules that aren't relevant to the children, and a lot of the private schools are getting it right, okay? It's a kind of learning that reaches each child, not just a box. And so they went into partnership, Roland Park did, wrote this charter, and it's a charter school, and I visited quite frequently. What they're doing with the girls, the scholars that are there, grades 5th through 8th, is they're preparing them for a future that they probably would not have had they not participated in this all-girls school. And so just a quick moment that when my grandmother Juanita was a little girl on Utah Street, she would watch the little white girls in midi blouses going to then Western High School. And when she was a little girl, she said, well, I want to go. And her mother said, well, you can't. It's segregated. And that Juanita Jackson Mitchell grew up to be the first Black woman to practice law in the state of Maryland, filed the cases to open the schools that her granddaughters, and I have a cousin here, Adonis, we are, extend our family, the other side, we are graduates of Western High School because we opened it up. Grandma opened it up, but you never count out a child.
Michael Mitchell, I want to ask you about something that Wendell alluded to, and having quote-unquote famous people in your house all the time, being in your home all the time. What was that like as a kid, just seeing people come and go all the time? You talked about Stevie Wonder playing on the back of a truck. I mean, talk about some of those stories.
You know, I don't want to put a damper on the discussion, but when I was growing up and going to the Henry Holland Garnett Elementary School, I lived a nightmare. We were in a restricted ghetto. You couldn't go above North Avenue. You couldn't go west beyond Mount Street. Fulton Avenue, would you believe it or not, actually had a garden similar to the Utah Place. And when blacks began to buy homes on Fulton, the city of Baltimore tore up that whole grassy area and made it one-way traffic to get whites from downtown to their homes above the area. I went to school where sometimes there wasn't sufficient coal to heat the furnace, so we all had to keep our coats on. And thank God we owe a debt to those black teachers who gave of themselves to give us a superior education. We sang, lift every voice and sing every morning. And more importantly, we brought extra newspaper to stuff the windows. And now you want to know what the relationship is to the people visiting? The people visiting were sad because I knew people were fighting around the country to make a difference. I wish Marvin Gaye had done his song, Make Me Wanna Holler. Because every time I would go out the door, I would sold newspapers, the Afro-American newspaper and the News American. And the News American gave the racetrack results for people who played policy. And I would try to get across Utah Place to sell my newspapers to people. And it just routinely on that Dolphin Street bus, the police would come and put me off the bus and said, "You're not allowed on here," and would leave the white boys on to sell their papers. I went to Druid Hill Park. Can you believe Druid Hill Park had swing sets, said whites only on a swing, and then it said, it didn't use the term black, it said color. Do you know that when I went to the, want to swim, there was the black swimming pool that was in the rear of Druid Hill Park that was never finished with tile but rough cement. So every time you went in the pool, you had it cut. Thank goodness AIDS wasn't around then or something else, some other communicable disease. When I grew up, there was tuberculosis and polio. There was a Baltimore City Health Department directly across the street from us. And they actually would only see blacks in the basement and the first floor. And all the white nurses who would come and the doctors would be on the fourth floor and thought that by being on the fourth floor, they wouldn't get tuberculosis. Who came to our, speaking of Senator Troy Greeley, A. Philip Randolph. I walked in one afternoon and met A. Philip Randolph, who was, you gotta understand who A. Philip Randolph was. He led the Pullman, the major transportation in the United States was the Pullman car company out of Chicago. And they, all of the black red caps and those who worked for the trains, Pullman mistreated them. And A. Philip Randolph beat the Pullman company, and they are now out of business, but he then became the union that represented them, became the first part of the AFL-CIO. I came home one afternoon, and who should be there but a young Wilma Rudolph, who just had won the Olympics in 1960. And, you know, and so you can imagine, you know, a 12-year-old boy wanted to see this, the lady who won the Olympics. And then there was Althea Gibson, who was Wimbledon champion. And then when I was about to there was my uncle married Jackie Robinson and Rachel Robinson in Los Angeles, who was a Methodist minister. He died early. But there was, I came in one afternoon and there was Jackie Robinson in the house having a meal because of his relationship with my uncle, who had made a difference in his life. You know, then I went to my grandmother's house on Utah Place, and who should be sitting at the seat but Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Nkrumah, and who was a sit-in leader from Howard University. And they were having a discussion about Kant, the philosopher. And, you know, the brilliance of the discussion, my grandmother said, get a first-class education. And then when you come back home, don't segregate yourself into intelligentsia few. The service to your people to fight for freedom is the rent you pay for your space on this earth. And you keep fighting and fighting and fighting until you can't fight anymore. And, you know, that's why a lot of people look at my gray hair. Don't underestimate me, because you may see me on a picket line at some point and going after, and, you know, I was in the city, and, you know, I have nothing against white people, and I think it's wonderful that we have integration and all. But there should be a black commission in Baltimore City, and I just say that it's not a criticism of the person, but I would say that we've got to think black until it gets better. Our children should not have to go to get an excellent education. I was speaking with a family. Their son had just finished Morgan State University, and the only job he could get was being a manager for McDonald's. Something's wrong with that picture. And this young man who escorted us in, where is he? He was born, there he is, young man, stand up so people can see you. Because, and give him a hand. He grew up in East Baltimore, got a first-class education, and now he works at City Hall. Now that's where the city's doing the right thing, that we take our young people. When I was at the city council, all the young people came from Little Italy. They came from other areas of the city, and now our young people are getting a chance to serve in City Hall. You know, my father, Clarence Mitchell, and the final thing that made me want to holler was this is 1960. So I would have been 15 years old. And I had a wonderful week at school, and I was on the swimming team at City College. And well, I mentioned that. Remember that in the city, there wasn't even you couldn't go to one YMCA. That's why today I refuse to go to the YMCA up there on 33rd Street. Maybe it's just a metal block. But they was called the Colored YMCA on the 1600 block of Druid Hill Avenue. And the swimming pool they put for us was only 15 meters. We didn't discover that until we went down to race the white YMCA people who were located at the corner of Mulberry and Cathedral. And do you know it was a 25-meter pool? This is Baltimore. Do you know in the lake that they're filling in now in Druid Hill Park, there were rowboats. And one lake there, and there were separate rowboats for white people and separate rowboats for colored people. And then more importantly, Judge William Murphy, Billy Murphy's father, because he liked to play tennis. The tennis court provided to blacks had holes in the ground and everything else. And meanwhile, the white tennis court, beautiful clay courts, you know, properly maintained by the city of Baltimore. But Judge William Murphy, who became a judge after having been arrested protesting discrimination in Baltimore in terms of integrating the tennis courts. And do you know that the University of Maryland Thurgood Marshall had to file lawsuits against every school in the university system? Yeah. And one of the things that I lived to do, and Uncle Parent said, one thing is take Curly Bird's name off of that stadium at the University of Maryland. And thank God, that's why God moves. I still believe that there's a God above who can help us. And all of the people who were protesting, alumni didn't want to remove Curly Bird's name. Finally, the provost there had enough passion to not only remove Curly Bird's name, but then name the sociology building that had denied admission to Parent Mitchell, who was represented, and Parent Mitchell was the first black student to go on the campus of College Park, Maryland. He had to catch a train every day. You know, they even wanted to build a separate school of sociology for him in Baltimore so he could attend by himself. This is the Baltimore I know. And therefore, we have a responsibility. We owe it to this new generation of young people to continue to fight and to make what is important to them. Give our young people jobs. They won't have to sell drugs. More importantly, crime only is greeted because of other things. And more importantly, stand by our elected officials and encourage them because, you know, every time we try to move ahead, there are always detractors. There was then the Sun Papers. And, you know, Parent Mitchell and myself were the first people to sue the Sun Papers who were successful and caused them to go into bankruptcy. But, you know, thank goodness they're not much around anymore. But I want to tell you that this is all worthwhile because as you see, now we're at the Reginald Lewis Museum down here in downtown Baltimore. This is where we couldn't come. And you should know that thank goodness Dana tell the man that he picked young Peter Bramble to be the developer of Harvard. I just am shouting, do you know that young Peter Bramble his father was the priest at St. Catherine's. This is St. Catherine's of Alexandria is the full name, at the corner of Division and Pressman Street. And Uncle Pern took young Peter to Washington and said, young man, you're gonna be something someday, and took an interest in him and encouraged him. And now this young man became a Rhodes Scholar and whatever have you. And this is the problem. And then sometimes I didn't hear, I was holding my mic up, Sean, so I apologize to you, but the reason I don't hear sometimes is because I was beaten by the police in Annapolis in 1964. I was drawn in to get a hamburger. And the classic line is, we don't serve no niggas in here. And I said, I don't hear them either. And at that point, they usually called, the thugs in the street to pull you out. But here the restaurant was next to the State House in Annapolis, Maryland, actually called the city police in Annapolis. And the police came and beat us with their spittoons. I received a concussion and permanently lost my hearing, which I have to wear hearing aids now. So that's why you understand when I holler, because, but I believe that we can make a difference. Look at that, we ended up with President Obama. Is that a miracle? Is that not a miracle? And still, we look at the black members of Congress. Jesse Jackson's third son is I've been in South Africa, and I'll tell you a minute about that. I don't mean to take much longer, but I said 30 seconds before, but I really will be 30 seconds now. But Jonathan Jackson is a member of Congress. He's Reverend Jesse Jackson's third son. And I helped him campaign because he represents a new era of representation in politics in the Congress. And he's there fighting and making a difference. Everybody, you could make a difference. Lillie Jackson, I'll finally say, said Jesus only had 12 people. One of them doubted everything he was doing, and the other one turned him into the police. And yet, he changed the whole world. So it only takes a few committed souls. And I mentioned South Africa because I'm bringing an exhibit to the City Hall in Baltimore. It is currently being exhibited at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. It's what we did in America to fight apartheid in South Africa and help free Nelson Mandela. And there was that connection. And more importantly, Clarence Mitchell's roommates, my father's roommates in college, imagine have Kwame Nkrumah come to your house for dinner. Imagine have Benazikwe, who was the first president of Nigeria, to come. But also to know that Daisy Bates came as well, the head of the Little Rock Nine. I will stop now, but I just thank you for your patience, but I have to add that history and to let you know that Baltimore wasn't that. Maryland was known as a lynch state because in 31, Matthew Williams was lynched, in 33, George Armwood. And know that it's part of our history that we've got to make a difference for our children in terms of making sure our children have an education, make sure they have textbooks, make sure they're fed properly, and make sure that the furnaces work and the air conditioners work.
That part.
Jill Carter.
What is there to say now?
Well, let's talk about the future and your legacy in particular. Your dad did the work that he did. You have done the work that you've done politically, and I've personally witnessed how you are beginning to pass the baton to another generation of leaders. I specifically speak of leaders of the beautiful struggle. You are like their mom. I know you may not feel great about that. You are clearly, but Adam and Davon owe great debt. They publicly acknowledge you all the time. The organization is one of the most dynamic black think tanks in the United States, and they've done incredible work. So I want you to speak to how important that has been for you in being a mentor.
So thank you for that. I really appreciate that acknowledgement. So the only thing I can really say is that it's been, and certainly Senator Mitchell said a lot of things that hit home and struck emotions. I was trying not to be emotional tonight, but you can't hear all of that history and relive it and not feel emotion. You can't be in Baltimore today and not feel extreme pain and heartbreak. based on everything we've been through, and this is where we are. I know some of us can't speak up about it, but we don't only have just a white police commissioner, we got a white administration, except for the mayor. Only one of the only white faces, and our great Dana here, but I mean, it's not just that. It is that, what Senator Mitchell just talked about, the unwillingness and the inability and the lack of courage and conviction to stand up for the health and well-being and evolution of our people. We still struggle with that. We have Black faces in high places, but we have very little deliverables for the Black community. Way too little. And so it was a very eye-opening experience for me to be in Annapolis and to realize, oh, it's not really just a mistake that we don't have anything. It's intentional. So I'm gonna stay here and initially I thought in House Delegates, I'm gonna stay here and keep fighting until I win. But the House always wins. So what you're saying, it pains me really quickly. I promise not to be long, but it gave me food for thought. It pains me that one of the problems we have with young people today is the lack of education and history. If it wasn't for the understanding of the history and the struggle of our people, if it wasn't for the commitment of the village and community that I grew up with, I wouldn't have had the sense of purpose and the sense of obligation to carry our people further, to use every gift and blessing I've ever had to make it better for our people. That is almost a dead thing these days. So when you see, as I met the young people you talked about, Davon and Adam and them, I met them when they're still in school, and initially it was sort of happenstance, they just kind of hung around me like a sponge. I think initially they just hadn't met anybody older that said the stuff I said, right? Because I did come out of the tradition of Vernon Dobson, one of the ministers who used to curse on the pulpit. I've been known to say a few of those words. But anyway, you see these young people with this potential, and it's important that the next generations understand leaders of a beautiful struggle, the struggle of our people, and be dedicated to carrying it forward. Else we're not gonna, everything, you know what we're faced with, and why I believe I've been pulled in the direction I've been in, because my dad died relatively young, and I felt, after I saw the way things were moving away from civil rights here, the way things were moving away from putting Black people and our people before ourselves, I felt like, well, if I don't use my life to try to further that cause, then no one will. And my father's life has been in vain. He gave his life for our people for nothing if we don't do something with it. And so that's why it's important to educate our young people and guide them to carry it forward. And you know what else it's important to do? It is really important to impress upon our people, present and young, that the cause of our people and our struggle together and as a collective is way more important than our individual benefits. And that's something difficult, but I'll tell you one thing, if our young people understood that, we would not have some of the behavior issues that we have. The reason we have it is they don't know who they are. They don't know who they come from. They don't know where they're going. And that is a fundamental thing that I think we have to do, not to preach. So it's really good.
So as we wind down, I want to kind of combine final statements from each of you individually with your thoughts on how your ancestors continue to inform you and guide you today. So let's start with Sandra Dobson.
As I mentioned before, I think we had a celebration on Sunday commemorating what would have been our grandfather's 100th birthday. And it was heart-wrenching. It was exciting. It was instructive. And it reminded me of what he intended for us. Even though his last days at the church were not the way any of us would have wanted, what he said to us was, don't ever leave the church. Don't ever leave the foundation of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Because the church has always been the foundation of our community. That's where it comes from. That's where the roots are.
Mm-hmm.
And I had made a decision that I wasn't going back. Because people are mean. Because people are cruel and people are liars. But people are also human and deserve forgiveness. They deserve another chance. They deserve to be loved. And they deserve to have the opportunity to have community. My father never, they called him the preacher that who visited every sick person in the hospital. Not the doctors, the patients weren't saying this. It was the doctors, the nurses, the technicians, all of them. Reverend Dobson comes to see everybody. And let's whittle that down. We, each one of us, we need to go to see everybody. Whether it's the person next door, whether it's the squeegee kid, we need to see everybody and translate that sight into action, and translate that action into the foundation of a new community.
Brother Wendell, well, Marty, I want you to go ahead.
I would only add to what my aunt just shared, seek to make impact, not to be important. And I think sometimes we miss it because we go out with the intention to have a great name. You know, people are going to remember me. History will record this. But when we seek to make impact, we will be important. And so that's a very big lesson that I learned from Granddad, as well as all that my aunt just shared. And to learn how to grasp all that is here to get the work done. And when we focus on that, then we will build community, then we will see about our kids, then we will be able to fight. And there's a reason why we hear all this talk about banned books and critical race theory and all of that stuff. We don't have time. But let's seek to make impact, not to be important. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say, you know, being now having been in North Carolina for 17 years, that grow where you're planted. Grow where you're planted, and as Arthur said, do what you can with what you got. You know, somebody fill in the rest of that because I messed up the rest of it. But start where you are. Do what you can with what you have. And so now I've gone from that into, I've been working at HBCU in higher ed since I've been in North Carolina. Started at A&T, went to North Carolina Central, and now working with Fayetteville State University and doing government relations. They don't allow you to call, they don't call you lobbyists, but they call you liaisons for the state. But also, you know, just talking about the importance of HBCUs, you know, impressing upon the students that I come in contact with, you know, telling them the stories about different history, right in the state where they are, the history of the people who went to the universities where they are, so that they know that they're part of something bigger than themselves, and they owe a debt of gratitude as they walk those hallowed grounds. To know you're not just supposed to get your degree and go out and, you don't educate to separate, you educate to elevate. And so, being able to talk to the young men and women, for me, is a ministry of its own, and kind of making sure that they know that you've got something to do. You get that diploma, the work's not over, it's just starting. It is just, that's why they call it a commencement. It's a beginning, not an end. And so I think that has been, I've learned to kind of love that, and getting it, as I said, supporting HBCUs, product of HBCU, and continue to fight where you are. Whatever needs to be championed, do that, and find those and build those young folks up so that when they come out, they know what they need to do.
I think I realized that so much of the work that several generations of my family, they were a part of the civil rights struggle of the 20th century, not the civil rights struggle. As my grandmother said, the civil rights struggle started when African mothers took themselves on the side of the ship rather than come to these lands as slaves, as property. And so the civil rights movement of the 20th century, our imprint for my family is on that. And so I've spent about the last decade getting information from our historian of our family to make sure that that history is documented. And that's a huge part of what fuels me, is that we've got to know. This morning, we were at the restoration launch for the Parent Mitchell house. His house is going to be a historic site. That's one Parent Mitchell house. The Juanita Jackson Mitchell office is going to be the Juanita Jackson Mitchell Law Center. And so their handprints are all across Baltimore, Maryland, and other parts of the country. And it's making sure that that history is told. The other thing that I do for money, but it's public service, is that I work in the Governor's Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs. And I realized work somewhere that's important to you. My dad sponsored the legislation that created the Office of Minority Business Enterprise. Every day I go in, we own that space. We created that space. And it was Great Uncle Perrin that wrote the federal legislation that created the MBE programs all around the country. And they're under attack now. And so now we have a governor who's not afraid to say MBE, who's not afraid to say minority business. So we are at a critical time when we can help Black businesses connect to state procurement at a time when they need other customers. And so working in that space, being able to have Black businesses, Black chambers of commerce know that state money belongs to them too. It's our money. And so for me, it is documenting their history and then opening up that portal to economic development for entrepreneurs in our community.
Jill first, and then we'll go to the closing.
All right, I'm going to be brief, everyone.
No, you got the last.
I told you I couldn't hear. Records down in Annapolis.
So all this talk, and it was mentioned here tonight, about destroying our history, my ending might not be what you think. It's just something I've thought about, but I think it's important to convey. Some years ago when I was in the House of Delegates, there had been a Walter P. Carter Mental Health Center on Fayette Street for many years. And there was talk about demolishing it in favor of a parking lot for the University of Maryland. And so I called Reverend Dobson. I said, hey, Reverend Dobson, I need somebody to come down here and testify to these committees and tell them why they need to keep the Walter P. Carter Center alive. Who can I call?
Me? I'm the one that knows most about the center more than anybody else.
You're talking to the right person. So, he doesn't come down and he gives me all the things to say. And what he really, I don't think I fully understood this until this conversation. He said that when my father died, all of the coalition of civil rights leaders, including Goon Squad and others, went to the then governor and made a demand that in honor of Walter Carter, we're gonna have this community center. And so then I said, well, why was the mental health center? Reverend Dobson said, because your father said, you know, these jokers not gonna give us nothing that's gonna really build us up, but they can buy mental health. So they called it the Mental Health Center with the idea that it would be more of a wraparound services and embrace and deal with all community needs, from mental health, societal needs, all kinds of things. But for the record, the Mental Health Center is now gone, and Baltimore City has no inpatient acute care mental health facility whatsoever, with all of the trauma and all of the mental health needs that we have. And so I think one of the missions that I would like to pursue is a recreation of a true community health center for our people, which is much needed, and it should never have been allowed.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons it wasn't, because, you know, when the elders move on, we and the younger people, we don't understand our history and the significance. That should have never been allowed to happen. So that's what I want to say, just that. Right here, if we don't preserve our history, if we don't record our history, if we don't get Senator Mitchell on tape soon, we're in real trouble, because there's not that many people who really know and understand our history like that, and that's critical to instill in our young people if we want them to have a sense of purpose and sense of who they are.
So let me say, if Senator Mitchell is willing, I would like to be the one to sit down and interview you and put you on tape, because it's needed, and I'm willing and able to do it.
Yeah, I would appreciate that, because, you know, we use this medium. People say, write a book. People don't read anymore. Use this technology. It goes around the world, and that's how we do it. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention my second older brother, who you didn't hear about as much, but his name was Dr. Kiefer Mitchell Sr., Jackson Mitchell Sr. He went to Meharry Medical School and came back and opened his office, not in a fancy glass building, but at 1230 Druid Hill Avenue, to service the people and bring them first-class medical care. And he was the first Black to be on the Johns Hopkins Medical School admissions committee. That's why now you go and see, and because of my mother, he admitted more Black women than Black men. She said the men were lazy, you needed more Black women doing things. And you see all of these faces now at Johns Hopkins. That's because of my brother. And then he was the person to integrate in 1954 the Glens Falls Park Junior High School. As my father described it, the signs were loud, and the police were there with over 4,000 whites yelling, "Niggas go back to Africa, leave." And more importantly, my father, and he believed in the Second Amendment, he wasn't afraid of anybody. He got his own picket sign to camel picket the protesters. This was a mean city. But as my Uncle Parents has a dedication today to say, and then my baby brother, George Davis Mitchell, he went to Boys Latin and became the top athlete there, and then went on to become a general contractor, one of the first minority contractors, and then developed a housing project with over 30 buildings and over 78 apartment units. So they had Section 8 housing, they had the first air conditioning in Baltimore City. So this is a family that's committed and stays right in the city. My Uncle Parent would say that he often quoted a Methodist minister who was born in the Eastern Shore who didn't have much education, but he wrote eloquent words and wrote incredible melodies. And those words should be our mantra, and the fact that we should go and make a difference. And those words are, harder yet may be the fight. Often wrong may yield to might. Wickedness a while may reign, Satan's cause may seem to gain, like having Donald Trump as president. But there's a God above who rules with hand of power and heart of love. And if I'm right, he'll fight my battle, and we shall have freedom someday.
McKoy for your time, your wisdom, and all these beautiful stories and sharing this history with us, because it is absolutely a narrative that has to be told. The story of Baltimore is one that will not be suppressed. And as long as we have our storytellers and our flame keepers, that story will not be suppressed. So thank you so much. Thank you, Dana, for putting this together. Everybody for coming out. We appreciate you.
Thanks for hanging in there, folks.
Really quickly, before you all leave, I have closing thoughts. I have to share this, or my boss will come down and have my head. Really quickly.
For 1
That's
minute.
okay, I'll keep talking. So a couple things I wanted to raise up. One thing we always talk about is Reginald F. Lewis, the $1 billion leverage buyout came, but there's two things that we don't talk about Reginald F. Lewis that are very important. One, you talk about the Small Business Administration. When he first founded his law firm, he worked with MBEs to help them understand legal ramifications. But I think for me, one of the most important things, and I had to capture this directly from the internet, is that Reginald F. Lewis was also counsel to the New York-based Commission for Racial Justice and represented the Wilmington 10. Yes, that includes Benjamin
Davis,
who is a very good friend and remembers him very fondly. And he talks about when they were trying to extradite them and bring them back, that they were on the plane, and Reginald Lewis put his hand out and said, "Follow me, just let me have the conversation." And in the end, he was able to successfully force North Carolina to pay interest on the bond that the Wilmington 10 had to put up. So that's another through line as to why this is important. Kiefer Mitchell, descendant of your brother, is now on the board of the Reginald F. Lewis Museum. He was with us today earlier. We held with him for 3 hours and he said, "Whoa, that's enough. I'll see y'all another time." You talk about medical professions. There are 2 exhibitions that we really want you to come back and see. One is Vision and Spirit, which is up on the 2nd floor. It's 100 works by 48 artists from the 19th and 20th century. It includes works from James Van Der Zee, Gordon Parks, and Dogwood Bay, and I lift them up specifically because they capture a lot of this history and the life of African Americans. But the final thing I will tell you is we talk about medical professions. On our 1st floor, we have an exhibition called Blacks and White, and it covers the history of African American health professionals specifically in the city of Baltimore. It is amazing. It talks about inequities in healthcare delivery and the role that African Americans played in making sure that those services were provided. It covers a lot of, or some of, the very influential African American medical professionals. I don't know if your brother's included. I'm sorry, we'll fix that. But we encourage you. We're so glad that you came. We want you to come back for more information about the museum, membership, which is important to keep us open, donors and all that. You can visit lewismuseum.org. Can
we just give a round of applause to our moderator? Us to bring your stories out for the public. You've been wonderful. I think that we would love to interview each of you individually and soon. Thank you so much for your
Can you all, can I get a photo of you guys? Jill?
I'm going to talk to make announcements for tomorrow at 10 a.m. wage enforcement session at the War Memorial, at noon at the Baltimore Civil Hall, and tomorrow night is the wages committee conversation.
I'm gonna try to get it. Yeah, while you're I just want to do it real quickly. I appreciate